The most interesting thing is the money is just a vehicle for playing the game of how to constantly recreate yourself, innovate on yourself, and pursue, you know, and so yeah, I love the conversations. How money, asking the money questions are the least interesting in my opinion. But as a final question, I do have to ask one money question for the audience because unfortunately, it breaks my heart that this will get the most views. Um, but
And
none
we're all
of
about views. I'm a social media slut, let's face it.
well, yeah, I mean, like the understanding the psychology and trying to live a beautiful life is, yeah, I hope everyone has just been profoundly impacted by what you've just said to me and everyone watching. But uh, for everyone who does want you to answer this, if you were starting with $1 million today, what would you be doing differently? Someone asked Warren Buffett that at the Berkshire meeting. I'm curious what your answer would be.
Differently to what I'm doing now.
Yeah. If you were
Well,
starting just with $1 million of your own money or capital you've raised.
um, so if it's $1 million, the first thing for me is that I'm getting a job as well. So I'm doing it part-time because I want to preserve that $1 million for investing, and I don't want to draw down on it for living. So I'm getting a job, and I'm paying all of my living expenses from my job, and I'm going to try and find a job that pays my living expenses and allows me to invest. So I don't want to pay my life expenses out of the returns. And that part of that is just take the pressure off. I know that all I need to do is compound that capital, $1 million, at any rate of return. But if I'm living, on $60,000 a year, then I'm drawing down. I don't want to be forced to have to make a 6% return just to stay even, say. So, and obviously, given the way I live now, if that were the case, I'd have to massively cut expenses. I have 3 children going through college, all sorts of expenses. So now we just talk about the investing. I've sorted out my life expenses part of it. And pay down debt, don't have any debt, pay down the mortgage, get rid of that. So really be able to just invest. I think that what then I would do differently to what I did and what I'm doing today is I would want to take higher risks with my investing if I'm starting. So it depends what age I am.
Let's say you're under 30.
Yeah, so I think I want to divide that million into at least 10 buckets, but it might be as many as 20 buckets. And I'm going to take, hopefully, so I'm going to try and make bets where none of them can turn out as a complete loss, but they all have a high enough probability of returning multiples of my money. And I'm going to, and the key is to divide it into the pots, to enough pots that I can keep going, that I'm not going to give up, that I'm not going to get scared. And if I've got big brass balls like Monish Pabra, I may only need 3 or 4 pots. But even Monish went to 10 by 10, so he was talking about 10%. I think that for me it's 20%, and so I've got to keep making those bets. And I'm not sure how many pots, because I think that I need to make those bets over a 5-year period minimum. So maybe it's 2 bets a year, and then it's 10 bets. So so that is actually 10% each time. So I'm drawing down on the $1 million.
Would you be flipping through Value Line? Would you be?
Oh, I see.
But to find 2 bets a year, would you be digging through the weeds?
So everybody has their own journey and their own story, and it's important to own that journey and story and not to regret that it's not a different story. In my story, I had enormous fears of losing money, losing the confidence of my first investor, who was my father. And so I had some bets like that worked out enormously, but I just didn't put very much money into them. An example was Duff and Phelps, where given the amount of money I was managing, I ought to have put $1 million in. I was managing about 10, and instead I put 200,000, and that $1 million would have turned into $7 million. Instead, 200,000 turned into 1.4. Still not a terrible result, but I didn't invest enough. So I was all the way through the life of the fund. I've had shares of Nestle. Nestle is a wonderful company, isn't going anywhere, but it's not going to get you 7x in 3 years or 2 years or whatever it was that it was in Duff and Phelps. So if I was starting my 30s and was doing it again, I would have way more of those. And if you take the scenario where my job is covered, yeah, each one of those bets is a Duff and Phelps types bet. I'm putting 5% to 10% of the net worth. You talked about $1 million into that. And where am I looking? If you want to find ideas that are going to be, 7x your money in that period of time, you're looking at sub-billion-dollar market cap companies. On the whole, it's far less likely to happen. So where am I going? I'm flipping through Value Line. I'm looking at Value Investors Club, Seeking Alpha. I'm going to things like the Zurich Project. I'm going to Value X. I'm going to the Berkshire meeting. I'm talking through best ideas. I'm trying to develop network with people who have good ideas. I'm running screens. But all of that, I love this. So this came up in the recent podcast that Monish Pabrai had with Shan Puri, who said, an idea is like an asshole. Everybody's got one. So ideas are like an asshole. Everybody's got one. At the end of the day, so it's not hard to come across the ideas. So the thing is, at some point, one has to actually say, okay, I'm going to commit now. And it's going to be in an uncertain environment. You're not going to see green. You're going to see amber. It's not going to be perfect. That's a kind of like a level of risk taking that in the past I was uncomfortable with because of this ergodicity stuff. I want to go with things that are far surer bets. I'm trying to find something that's a 7x and also is a sure bet. Every now and then those will come up. But I'm going to take things where it's not a sure bet, but it's still a potential 7x, and I actually have to move to, and then where I find them is constantly going to be changing, but I need to try all sorts of different avenues. I was reading recently a wonderful piece of research that was produced 4 or 5 years ago where they looked at companies, and I can share with you the research that had done sort of like 100 baggers or 50 baggers, and they looked at where those ideas came from, and they show that there was a kind of a skew, for example, to the countries where those companies existed. And funnily enough, the countries, like the Scandinavian countries, score quite highly in that category. And it's surprising because it's a social welfare state with high taxes and things. Exact reason for that, who knows? But it might be, it turned out that the AIM market in the UK had a pretty high number of those companies. So maybe I'm saying, look at AIM companies. Maybe I'm looking at small caps. Maybe I'm finding what works. But at some point, you've got to make a move, Mm-hmm. And Warren calls them wrinkles. So yeah, I'd be doing more of those wrinkles. And I would have been developing the muscle the muscle in me, for all sorts of reasons, is not as well developed as it could be, of being willing to look at wrinkles, things where there's something going on, special situations, that makes it an unusual valuation and a very good likelihood of a very, very high return, but where there's also some hair on it. And, that's a muscle that you can strengthen. That muscle is far stronger in Monish than it is in me. And there are all sorts of reasons for that. Partly it's temperament in Monish. Partly it's a very unusual childhood that Monish had. Monish's father was an entrepreneur who went bankrupt many times. Monish has told that story a few times. And Monish learned that was okay. He's not afraid of those kinds of high risks and potential losses, and that's what gives him an unusual orientation towards risk, which I don't have. And so I would be working hard to strengthen that muscle at a younger age. Yeah, that's what I'd be doing with $1 million.
Thank you so much.
Well, I sort of come back on myself and say, you look at my last letter to investors, the most important thing, survival is everything. So I think in all of that, I'm at the same time, so I want to optimize that better. I think what I'm trying to say is that if I look at what I did, for understandable reasons, I was way more risk averse and conservative than I should have been. And that's okay. I forgive myself. I think that I should have been willing to turn that dial up in the ways that I've described, but with the constraint of never risking going out of business. And I would say that when Warren gets asked that question, he's so confident at that, yeah, but and probably Warren is right to be confident, but for every Warren, there's probably a million people who are not right to be confident. And so what's the probability that I'm Warren? What's the probability that I'm not? There's a far higher likelihood that I'm not Warren. So even if I think that I'm going to be successful, assume you're not, you know? And forgive me, I'm just sort of like, I'm adding length to this. I hope that's positive, not negative.
It's a positive.
So the intern I've got right now, Shmuel, he enjoyed this. It's like, assume God is watching you. And it doesn't matter whether you believe in God or not, you know? God is wired into our genes. Most humans evolved with some idea, conception of some kind of God. So if you don't believe in God, it's not a problem. Just activate that part of your genetic makeup that believes that there is a God. We all have that. Be an atheist and do this. And now God is watching me. And if I invest in that thing, God is going to make it go down by 50%. Only if I invest in it. If I don't invest in it, it's going to go straight up to the moon. But the minute he sees that I invested in it, it's going to go down by 50%, at least. Because God is going to say, well, are you serious? You know, did you really want to invest in that? Show me how serious you were. You know, assume God's going to do that to you on every investment. You know, and then there's another thing, which is that every risk that I don't investigate is the one that God's going to make show up in the. So if it's kind of like the uncertainty principle. You know, it's like if I investigate it, it won't show up, and it will turn out to have been useless. But if I don't investigate it, God will dafka, is the Hebrew expression, will just to be that way, will make it show up, you know? So assume that. And so one of the reasons why I love maths, after this I'm going to dinner with mathematicians. It's like the square root of minus 1. So fascinating. You know, for the longest time, there were mathematicians who were like, that doesn't exist, and we don't do maths with the square root of negative 1. For a certain period of time, there were mathematicians who didn't accept the existence of negative numbers. How could there be negative numbers? You either had objects or there weren't any. A minus 1, you know, until they finally accepted the number line. So I find it fascinating that those ideas about God watching me is extremely powerful. And you don't have to believe God exists for that idea to be powerful and to be affect action. So yeah, but it's fun to talk to you. I hope that I've been helpful. I just find myself blathering on.
No, very helpful.
We'll find out by the number of video views. That's how we'll find out.
That's true. Yes, especially the last part there in that question. Yeah, people come for the gossip on what would you do with $1 million, but we're going to keep them by having the here's what actually matters, hopefully, in life. So thank you so much, Guy. It's really been a pleasure.
I've been looking forward to hosting in my office for a very long time, and so ever since you came out of the woodworks, I don't know, about 3 years ago maybe, it's been such a pleasure getting to know you, and it's been really fun for me to be at a place in my life where I'm, you know, you're a highly selected person. So I didn't walk out on the street and pick up a Jeremy Stickney. Jeremy Stickney sent me an email. You identified me. You sent me a message. Was it on Twitter?
No, just email.
It was an email.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right. But I did some, I mean, Jeremy told me about a little bit about what you'd worked on. I was like, wow, I've never met a guy like that. The only guy I know, or one other, it's not the only one, connection like that is Syed Balki, who sent me a message on Twitter. And I in your case, I looked to see the podcast that you'd worked on, and I was like, oh my God, how many subscriptions was it at the time?
At the time, 3 million. Yeah.
Yeah, I was like, my God, I've never talked to a guy with 3 million. So, and in this case, Syed gets in touch with me, and I look and I see, my God, he's got 100,000 followers. So I messaged him back within a week. We were talking on the phone. Within 2 weeks, I introduced him to Monish Pabrai. And he's now part of our lattice work group. It's quite incredible.